So right now, while the handouts are being circulated, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Stephen Heller. I'm a licensing attorney, and I'm also the owner of a licensing agency called The Brand Liaison. At The Brand Liaison, we represent both brands and manufacturers, and the primary areas of focus where we license are fashion brands, children's properties, sports, and we represent several celebrities, including Damon John, who was here at the Licensing Expo this morning, David Tutera, Robert Irvine, and Catherine Zeta-Jones. If any of you have seen me before speak, you all know that my famous or infamous story of discovering the Ninja Turtles back in the 1980s when it was still just a comic book. And I saw the Ninja Turtles and I said, this thing will never sell. I've regretted it ever since, but I made up for it. You lost me. They lost me? You still hear me? Okay. So after passing on the Ninja Turtles, I made up for it a few years later when I signed the Sesame Street license for Kmart, which was an opening program of over $100 million. Since then, I've handled worldwide licensing deals for brands like Gloria Vanderbilt, Nautica. I've done licensing deals with the NFL, the NBA, Warner Brothers, Disney. In fact, last year we got our client the rights for the NFL for all of China and Asia. So I'd like to welcome you all to our seminar and myself and introduce my partner, Alita Friedman.
Thanks, Stephen. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I'm Alita Friedman. I started my career as a CPA, so I'm that numbers geek, and got into branding in 2003 when someone passed me a little plush doll and had called it the Ugly Doll and asked me if I was interested in creating a brand, and worked on all the product development, sales, marketing, and eventually licensing. So I was sitting kind of where you're sitting. 16 years ago was my first licensing show, and learned how to put deals together based on the brand that I built. And you'll hear a lot of things today as we speak about sort of the do's and the don'ts and the tricks of the trade in negotiating. After working on that brand for 12 years, we did a movie deal with a big entertainment company, and we had our movie come out last month in May, and we have an animated feature film. We also turned it into hundreds of licensed products, and we're enjoying now turning it into a television show on Hulu. 5 years ago, after working on that brand for so long, I decided to go out on my own and work on new brands. So I work on everything from startups to patented products to consumer products. I'm involved in a few ventures on my own, some of which were on Shark Tank. And I also work with clients that have brands and want brand extensions, basically creating revenue for brands through really interesting collaborations. Some of my current projects include Lufthansa Airlines, where I just signed a deal with a toy manufacturer so everyone can enjoy little toy planes. I work on an artist movement called Inktober. I work on preschool properties, gaming properties, and happy to connect with you. I'm also on the executive board of Women in Toys Licensing and Entertainment, and I will pitch that tomorrow morning. There's a great networking breakfast that starts at 7:30 at the Border Grill, and everyone's welcome to join there, men and women, and it's really an amazing group, and we're all about making sure that everyone has opportunities in this industry.
For the aspiring women entrepreneurs here, the Women in Toys organization is actually a great organization. They do a Women Empowerment Day, and I've seen remarkable things happen, so I encourage all of you to go to Alita's event tomorrow. So enough about us. Let's talk about you guys and why you're here. Let me see by a show of hands, how many people in the room are a licensor that has a brand that they're looking to license? Excellent. And how many people here are licensees that are manufacturers that are looking to take on licenses? That's great. And how many of you people don't know the difference?
Oh, come on.
I'm so glad that you guys are here and you have knowledge of what we're trying to accomplish. What we're going to teach you today is how to negotiate those licensing deals. So for all of you brand owners that have created a unique property or have a brand or characters that you're trying to license, this term sheet that we're going to go over today is going to be super helpful to you. And those of you that are manufacturers that take on licenses, that are walking the show and looking to acquire a property, this is the same term sheet that the licensors will use to negotiate your deal, and hopefully will give you some great tools and tips how to get the licensing deal you want without overcommitting or overpaying. So everyone wants to get the most out of a licensing deal. Our goals for today, we're going to provide you with a handy reference term sheet to use to negotiate the formal license agreements. We're going to offer some tools and insights to tackle the common hurdles that act as an impediment or an obstacle to completing a licensing deal. And we're going to explore various payment structures and give you some tools and tips how to negotiate the financial terms of a license agreement. So for the licensors, the people with intellectual property, let's talk about how you get ready for licensing and what are the requirements that you need for licensing. Go ahead.
So really it's about finding that compelling driver. So everyone knows they have to have their elevator pitch. What is your compelling driver? What in 2 seconds are you trying to get across from somebody about why your brand is so great, or why someone should take your brand, or what types of brands you're looking for? It could be social media. Your statistics could be like off the charts. It could be sales figures that you've sold an incredible amount of product. It could be that you have a patent or something extremely special about your product. It could be a unique fan base. So just to give you an example of a very niche fan base, an artist brand that I'm working on right now has a 90% conversion rate on e-commerce for their products because they have such a focused audience. That's very interesting, coupled with a 12 million user uploaded Instagram number. But it could also be something about your IP that's different. So you want to make sure that your IP is different, it's compelling, and you want to be able to get that point across very easily, what your product is, why it's compelling to someone.
So focus on, when you do that elevator pitch, pretend you're on Shark Tank and you only got 60 seconds to explain to them what you have and why they should invest in you. Because a licensor, if you have a property or a product that you're trying to license, you're going to be asking someone to give you money. They're investing in you to go and sell that licensed product that they're going to license from you. Be able to get to that compelling driver. And unfortunately today, a cute character or a fun name alone may not be enough. Have some statistics, conversion rates, social media statistics, and the compelling reason why someone's going to invest in you.
Yeah. Why are you so different than everybody else that's out here? Why is your character brand better, cuter? Is it international? Does it have a flavor? Like, what is it about your brand? And if you don't have that, go back to the drawing board and figure that out, because if it's been done before, everyone here knows that. They want something different.
Now, an agent can help you, and Alita and I are both licensing agents, can help you get that property ready for licensing. So why do you work with an agent? Well, agents perform various functions, but the first one is going to be to help you evaluate your property and prepare your pitch deck. Get that property ready for licensing, how to present it, how to get those compelling statistics and reasons across quickly. Licensing agent will help you with introductions. A lot of us know all the major players. We know the companies that have the reach and the distribution to the major retailers. Will help in the negotiation. Many licensing agents can help in the management of your licensing program, especially when you have multiple partners. And of course, the royalty collections, making sure you're getting paid the money that you're expecting.
Sometimes it's a little bit different than you might think. So you want to have the expertise of somebody who's done a lot of deals, who's made some mistakes, who've seen the ups and downs, and knows how to turn things around for the positive. So one thing Stephen just said was that agent's going to help you organize your brand deck. That is extremely important because you know your statistics, you know your brand inside and out, but it needs to be laid out in a very systematic fashion that you're telling your story through your brand visually, but you're also including the proper statistics so that someone's evaluating if they want to make an investment in this brand and in you, what that story is. So the brand deck is a critical piece of that.
So how are agents compensated? For us, every representation is different. We always look to create a compensation structure that provides incentives. We like to stay hungry and participate in a profit sharing or a revenue sharing, but very often with representation of new licensors creating a property, there's a lot of foundational work. So many agents have a base monthly fee or retainer, plus some sort of a contingency or commitment. And that aligns the interest of our client and our agency, because we both have the same goal: maximize the revenue, create revenue streams that will last a long time. The commissions, when commissions are paid to a licensing agent, very often there's going to be an advance, the royalty payments, and often there are guarantees and minimum payments. For those of you that are licensees can also work with a licensing agent. Corey Weisner, who's part of Brand Liaison, he represents our manufacturers. He goes out and he helps our licensees find the right brands. And it's a very similar structure where we're building in our commission based on the volume of the performance of the properties that we bring. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit about working with agents. But let's get into the license agreements and the deal terms. If you're ready to license, these are going to be the key terms that you're going to want. And by the way, Marty is going to circulate this deal memo. Feel free to use this form, download it. And if you have any questions, of course, you can reach out to myself or Alita at any time. We'd be happy to help you try to close some of these deals. So when you have a licensing deal sheet, first it's very important that you identify the right parties. From a licensor perspective, you want to look at who is your licensee. Make sure that it's a company that's established, that it has operations and revenue, so that you're not doing what they call a naked license to a company that isn't going to be able to pay you the monies that you're promised or do the performance. So as a licensor with a brand or a property, you want to do your homework, know who's the licensee, what's the right legal entity that you're licensing to. And as a licensee, it's really important that you look at your licensor and make sure that they're the owner of their IP, especially sometimes when someone has a patent or a property that they developed and it's in their personal name, but you're doing a license with the company or vice versa. So very important that you identify the right parties to the deal. And then, what is the licensed property? And this becomes very important, although it seems very basic. If it's a patent, let's make sure we're licensing the patent plus all the know-how and the technology behind it. If we're a licensee and we're looking to license a brand or a character, are we licensing one character or a collection? Or if you were licensing, for example, Star Wars, that came out with then 6 more movies and 6 more characters. Very often today, licensing agreements are set to only the initial property, or maybe it's Series 1 and not Series 2. Do you get the derivatives, the new products? The new properties when a second movie comes out, or a sequel, or a prequel? And by the way, this happens with apparel brands as well. You have Donna Karan, and then you have DKNY. And we met earlier today with Ralph Lauren that has Lauren by Ralph Lauren and Chaps by Ralph Lauren. What is the actual property that you're licensing? And it's important that you're very specific.
So, if you're talking about character brands, for example, a lot of people have. Anybody here of character brands? Raise your hand. Okay, so when you're licensing a character brand, somebody might look at it and say, okay, they're assuming that they're getting your first, maybe it has 12 characters, maybe it has 80, but then you have iterations maybe for seasonal or holidays or events or things that you're putting out later. They may or may not be included in that license. So, it's very important to spell out exactly what you're giving up. I work with a gaming property, for example, and the gaming app, as it is today, is being licensed. And we all know, because it's been announced, that we're working on a television show for that same gaming app. So everybody wants the TV show rights. Well, we can't give those out yet. So they will not go on that licensing deal. But there are other tricks of the trade that we know as agents that we might be able to give out a first look. We can give and grant a first look deal at certain things. So at least a partner that is getting into the brand and investing is having an opportunity first to pitch and to bid on that property. So it's really important. A lot of the things in this term sheet are going to look very basic. Sure, a period of time, how long is it, who are the parties, what are you licensing? But we know the nuances, and that's why you definitely want to talk to some experts before you get into an agreement about what are you giving up, what rights are you giving up, to whom, for how long, and in what segment of retail. Everyone here wants to sell something. Are you selling to specialty? Are you selling to mass retail? Do you know the difference between the two? Are you selling to e-commerce? Are you selling in the U.S. only? North America. North America will include Canada and Mexico. Are you selling to different continents around the world? So it's very important to have all of these little nuances identified in the term sheet that will go into the contract.
So identifying the licensed properties, what art assets, what name brands come with it. Shopkins or Alita mentioned the video gaming. How many people have heard of Fortnite? So Fortnite, obviously they're coming out with new characters, new skins all the time. It's important that your license agreement covers this. And a handy trick here, if you're the licensor or the licensee, that right of first refusal or right of first look puts both parties in a much more proactive situation. As the licensor, you're not giving away the farm on the first deal. And as the licensee, you're not going to let somebody else, one of your competitors, come in and scoop out a piece of the domain that you're creating. So right of first refusal, right of first look, or first negotiation, when there are diffusion brands or new iterations or new series. Shopkins every year comes out with new series, Series 2, Series 3, Series 4. That right of first refusal or right of first look is a great tool for both licensors and licensees. Licensed products. Again, another area that I see a lot of first-timers make a big mistake. So it's very important that you identify what are the licensed products included in the license. From a licensor's perspective, you don't want to use overbroad general terms. I had a first-time licensee. It was an $80 million footwear brand. They were selling in Macy's and JCPenney's and Kohl's. They were only selling footwear, and they wanted to expand. So what's a great way to expand? Hey, we're going to license our name. We want to do some other categories. So I spoke to them early on, and they said, well, yeah, we already have a licensing deal for apparel. And I said, well, what kind of apparel? They said, no, we just did a licensing deal for apparel. So you realize there are lots of categories of apparel. There's outerwear, there's sleepwear, there's jeans. Very often denim is a separate category. There's boys, girls, men's, women's. Their license only said apparel. They used an overly broad term, and then they were precluded from doing lots of other deals because the company that they licensed to only made very limited shirts. They didn't do denim, they didn't do outerwear or swimwear or sleepwear or underwear. So very important that and I see this mistake a lot by first-time licensors, that we really narrow down what are we licensing, and let's focus on what products the licensee actually makes. For those of you that are licensees that are taking on, make sure that you list clearly all the products that you want in your license. Don't just necessarily assume. We had a licensee recently that we did social stationery and we did pens and pencils in their license. We didn't name the pouches that they hold the pens and pencils in, or some of the hardcover notebooks and things like that. So you want to be specific and list all of those products, even if it's a list of 8, 10, 15, 20 different items.
Another reason to make sure that you're being really specific is you might get so excited that you get a licensee. Maybe you have a brand and you get someone to make all of your toys, and you just want to have them make everything for you, and you can see they make lots of different products. But you have to be really careful, because what happens if your property blows up and all of a sudden one day Hasbro maybe is not your toy licensee, you have someone else, but then they want to make, a Monopoly version of your game. Well, if you just locked up your toy license forever and ever with a licensee exclusively, you might not be able to make that game. So you want to have certain provisions, and we know that you can have provisions where that the licensee might have a first look, a review, to see if they can agree that you can go and license this. One really popular toy company now, we all know that went public, is Funko. So it's kind of like a chip off the old, it's really great if you can get a cool Funko figure. But if you just lined up action figures with someone else, you might not have left yourself open to do that kind of deal. So it's really important to have somebody coach you, whether it's an agent or someone in the business, to coach you to be able to let you know how do we break down these categories? How do we break down that segment of retailer? How do we break down the exclusivity? And that's really important.
And I think Alita hit on a key word right at the end there, exclusivity. So as a licensor, you have a little bit less risk using overbroad terms when it's a non-exclusive license, but you're also going to get less dollars and cents when it's a non-exclusive license. So that exclusivity, guarantees, and commitments that we're going to talk about, there's also a balance with that. So very important from a licensor perspective that you keep it narrow enough. From a licensee perspective, make sure you get all of your products in there, including the products that you might look to add in the future. And again, write a first edition will be very helpful as you go forward. Exclusivity, if you take one thing out of today's lecture, licensors, do not do an exclusive license that does not have guarantees or minimum commitments. I'm going to repeat it. Licensors, do not grant an exclusive license that does not have guarantees or minimum commitments, because I've seen it time and time again. Licensee is very excited about the property. They make lots of promises. You sign an exclusive license for 2 years or 3 years. Oh, we're going to get to it. We have this other big project for Target first. We have this other big project. We're going to get to it. There's been a management change. Now the new management isn't as excited as the old management. And all of a sudden you have your property locked up for 2 years and there's nothing you can do about it. And even if they're making a little bit of product, they're making a little bit of money, but it's not meaningful to them or to you, you're still locked up with a long-term agreement because you didn't have guarantees or minimum performance standards. Now, licensees, I know you all want an exclusive license, and you just told me, warn the licensors, you're not going to sign a deal without guarantees or minimum commitments. So as a licensee, how do you solve that problem without overcommitting? You can do it on a graduated scale, or I'm going to give you a trick in a few minutes, how to use guaranteed minimum sales as a performance standard instead of guaranteed minimum royalties. But we're going to get to that in a couple of minutes. But exclusivity, spelling it out, is very important in the license.
We also talk about marketing and on-shelf date. So really, you can hold your licensee, if you're a licensor, you can hold them to a commitment that they must, pardon me? That they must get to take that property, whatever it is, to certain trade shows or that they have certain marketing dollar commitments. So there's a lot of things that you can do. So you'll be able to say to them, well, are you taking this to the toy show? Are you taking this to the gift show? Do you go to, the shows in Asia that are popping up? Do you go to the shows in Europe? You want to know where that licensee is taking your product and showing it. And as the licensee, you want to make sure that you're being able to communicate and that you're taking that license where it needs to be shown.
So Alita brought up a very important point about trade shows, channels of distribution. She mentioned Asia. So the next key factor that you want to negotiate is the license territory. So licensors, let's look at where do they actually sell. You don't want to grant a worldwide license when the company only sells in the USA and Canada, or if they only sell in the USA, we don't even want Canada in a North American license. Let's identify the territory. Let's be specific. Where do they sell? And the channels of distribution. This is a great way for licensors to slice up your licensing pie. A term that I use a lot. Slice up the licensing pie. Because as a licensor, we want to maximize the revenues. We want to bring on the right partners so that we don't have underperforming products or underperforming channels of distribution. So if we have a licensee, in fact, we do several deals that we do Costco only, because doing business with Costco is an art in and of itself for a licensee. So we do a Costco only deal because some companies really only focus on Costco, only focus on Walmart, and don't sell all the other channels. By the same token, there are some companies that focus on specialty stores or e-commerce. Let's focus on the channels of distribution. So here's a handy tip. Alita mentioned earlier, you have your department stores, obviously your Macy's, your Bloomingdale's. You have off-price channels, TJ Maxx, Ross, Burlington. You have mass merchants, which are Walmart, Target, Kmart, Sears. You have the deep discount value channels, the dollar stores and many other similar stores. And then you have specialty channels, which could also be identified as boutiques, mom and pops, or specialty chains, things like Bed Bath & Beyond, Barnes & Noble, Michael's, Joann's, Lowe's, Home Depot. All of these channels, you may grant a license to somebody. Well, they don't sell Lowe's or Home Depot, but we have a client that does night lights and light fixtures at Lowe's and Home Depot, and they can take Disney and Warner Brothers and all these great character licenses, and the other competitors that might sell to department stores or specialty channels don't sell those home good channels. So again, great way to slice up the licensing pie. Licensees, take a look. Who do you actually sell to? Make sure that all those channels are in your license so that you're taking advantage of all the sales opportunities for your new property.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. We just did a deal last year where we gave a company the rights for a property, and they took it for North America and Europe. And as time went on, they acquired a company. A company they acquired allowed them to now do business in Australia. So they came back to us and said, we want more rights. We want to add these countries. And the good thing is that we hadn't given up the rights too soon for an area they didn't have. And now they pay us additional money. We edit the contract. We update what's in the contract. And there's an additional payment of an advance for that new territory. So it can be fruitful for you to be extra careful and let those licensees come back later. And the licensees should be really practical about, where is your business? Understand where it really is. Take what you have, not where you think you're going. And once you have that business, go back and get that. Because also you'll pay, it's very important to pay rationally, and no one wants to overpay, no one wants to underpay. So to get it right.
Here's a really interesting anecdote, and also somewhere where a licensing agent, someone who's had the experience in negotiating these, can be really helpful. We recently did a licensing deal for Plush Toys with a property. And the licensee sells every one of those channels of distribution that I just mentioned. But when it comes to plush, and sometimes even when it comes to apparel, there's another channel of distribution that often goes unnoticed: amusement parks and theme parks. And again, it's a very specialty industry. We did a licensing deal for plush, but we carved out amusement parks and theme parks. We ended up doing a deal with another licensee that specializes in that channel. And amusement parks and theme parks create a whole new area of revenue, a new opportunity for licensors that are looking to maximize, especially with character properties and sometimes custom properties. Another channel of distribution that's really interesting is something called resort and name droppers. If there are any artists in the room that have created unique art, there's a whole industry of companies that print t-shirts and sweatshirts and then drop in the names of the cities or the beaches. Again, completely additional channel of distribution, and forms a great opportunity for licensors to expand their property. The last thing I want to talk about on channels of distribution, because the licensing term sheet reminds you, you have the approved channels. You may also want restricted channels. You may not want your brand in Walmart, or you may not want your brand at Dollar General. And it's very important to spell out in the license not only where they're allowed to sell, sometimes spell out where they're not allowed to sell. And especially with higher end brands that don't necessarily want to be in certain channels of distribution.
And that's a huge brand strategy, and I have a lot of experience with that, where we only wanted to keep certain things in the specialty market. And when we extended more licensees and we weren't ready yet to have them go into a wider distribution, we worked out by giving them an additional time on their license. So maybe it was 2 years, we extended it at no charge to a third year, so it would make up for the time that they couldn't get it out into that retail distribution. So that's when I say, like, the tricks of the trade that we can help you work through.
So Alita just mentioned time. The next thing on our term sheet is the term of the license agreement. How long does it last? When I represent licensors, we want to keep the term controlled, and we don't want to enter into an overly long license agreement because we don't know the value of the property. As we grow this property and we start to get traction, the value of the property could increase significantly. So we have the guarantees and the minimum performance standards, but your property may be in much greater demand 3 years from now than it was at the time you signed the license. But for licensees, you're going to spend the time now getting that shelf space, getting your test orders, developing the market for this product. You don't want the rug pulled out from under you just when you've built it up, and no less lose that shelf space to a competitor. So licensees, very important, always make sure you have a right for renewal. It may have to have certain commitments that are greater. It may come down to a right of first refusal in the future, but you surely don't want the rug pulled out from you when you spend 3 years trying to build this up. So licensees, if you take one thing out of today's conference, make sure that you have a right of renewal in your license agreement, even if that means higher commitments and higher guarantees in the renewal term. Typical deals, by the way, 3-year license, 3-year renewal term. But I've done deals that are 5 years with 5-year renewal terms. I've done one that actually could have been as long as 15 years. But generally right now, most license deals are 3 years, sometimes 2, with a 3-year renewal.
And let's talk about how long, being realistic about how long this process takes. So you're talking about attorneys approving your licensing contract. So this is the term sheet that's going to get you into business with your licensee or licensor, whichever side you're sitting on. But you're going to have to take this and get into a longer contract. And that can take time. So if you meet someone here at the show today and you follow up and you decide that you're going to get this term sheet executed in the next 60 to 90 days, so great, by the end of the summer you think you're working on your first deal, And then you're going to get the lawyers involved, and they're going to go back and forth on the terms, my lawyer friend here.
Those pesky lawyers.
And then during the process, you're going to decide if somebody can start sampling that product and getting the production made. And then they need to go out and start selling that product and showing it for sale and putting it in, whether it's their catalog or taking it to a trade show or whatever that is. By the time then that retailer wants to take it and agree to it, to put it on their shelf for a certain time period, guess what? You're talking a year and a half easy if you want to deal with a big size retailer. To get something into e-commerce, you can do it much quicker. But just understand that it takes time to get this done, and and you have to allow the process to take the time. But in the meantime, you and that licensee or licensor are going back and forth on a regular basis. The royalty rate, which is the next really important thing, is going to be a percentage that one party is going to charge for the use of their license. Think of it as you're renting somebody your property. What is the percent of that sale that they're going to have to pay? And that has a big range. You could go as low as 2%, you can go as high as 20%. It depends on the product category, it depends on that channel of distribution, it depends who's manufacturing the product. So there's so much that goes into establishing that royalty rate. It goes into that same channel of distribution. A character property might do this, a music property might do that. And it's very important to find out and to do your research and to understand what you should be charging so that you're in a reasonable range.
People often ask me, well, what's an average royalty rate? And Alita and I give that same answer. It could be anywhere from 2% to 20%. It's almost like not even a helpful answer because there's so many variables that go into it. Obviously, the value of the property. A lot of newcomers creating a new licensed property, you'll probably be in that 5 or 6% range. Sometimes you could be up around 10%. Disney and Warner Brothers and those properties are probably getting in that 14, 15, maybe 16%, where the NFL, if you license the NFL, it's a 16% royalty based on the wholesale price of the product. And I've seen some deals go up as high as 20%. I saw for an Under Armour license deal. Probably worth 20% of wholesale to put Under Armour's brand on your product. But not only does it depend on the value of the property, but also the product. Is it a high margin product? Things like jewelry or perfume or liquor that may have higher margins? Or is it a commodity driven, a consumable product where every penny that goes into that price point makes a big difference? So the property, the product, and the channel of distribution. Because if you want to be selling products that are at Walmart and selling that kind of volume, you're not going to have the same healthy margins if you sold that product at Neiman Marcus or Barney's or a high-end store that there's a heavy margin. So licensees, very important that you look at the margins and make sure that you can afford that royalty based on, most of the time, based on the wholesale, net wholesale sales. So it's important that you define a formula for net wholesale sales, especially if you're also into retail and e-commerce. Sometimes you could base the royalty on the retail sales, but it's important that you define what that net is. Net of what? Margins, markdown allowances, advertising allowances that sometimes have to contribute. Sometimes shipping could be a cost in there. Or is it the net profit margin? Licensors, you probably don't want to do a license based on net profit. Do it on the net sales revenue.
So there's a lot of things to think about. There's one also alternative that we didn't talk about yet that's your agent or you might be doing with directly something with a retailer. And you might not even realize this, but sometimes it's possible to do something with the retailer where the retailer takes the license and they manufacture the product. And that's called a direct to retail relationship. And if someone you are brought to the table to discuss that, the royalty rates on that type of deal are very different because you're dealing directly with that royalty, with that retailer. You're talking directly about marketing opportunities, how much or how little that's going to be marketed. You're responsible for your brand, so you still are responsible for marketing that brand, and you want to understand what you can and can't do if you go to a DTR, a direct-to-retail relationship. So that's just another type of agreement that could be brought to the table. And there are companies, everything from like a Walmart to a Target to a Bed Bath & Beyond, that all do direct-to-retail.
In fact, we just did a recent deal. I don't know if my friend Maury is here in the room. He just pulled off a great deal. There was a great Shark Tank property called the Cupboard Pro. I don't know if you saw this episode of Shark Tank. The father had developed a great cutting board and then passed away from 9/11 complications. All 5 sharks went in on this property, and they did a direct-to-retail license. That product is now at Williams-Sonoma. And the proceeds go
the kids were on,
yeah,
right?
the proceeds go to the family and the charity. So that was a direct-to-retail license for a special product, a licensed product. So one other term that's on the slideshow, when we talk about the royalty rate, and I had mentioned channels of distribution, when you sell at Walmart or you sell at TJ Maxx or Burlington in the off-price, or you're selling at department store or specialty. Another great trick for licensees and fair for licensors is a tiered royalty rate. So where the licensee makes more margin, where they can get a greater percentage, they can pay a higher royalty. But when they have to sell it at a discount to TJ Maxx or Burlington, or cut the margins even smaller to get Walmart or Costco business, where the volumes are going to dwarf that of the department store, well, let's do a lower percentage because the licensee is making a lower percentage. So a tiered royalty rate, say 8% for department and specialty store, 6% or 5% for TJ Maxx, Ross, and Burlington, the off-price channels, and maybe even 4% for Walmart or Costco, where the volumes are much more significant and the margins are even lower. So again, a tiered royalty rate could be a very effective negotiating tool when it comes to the royalty rates.
Another thing that's really popular these days and has been for the past pretty much like decade is collaborations. So you might see 2 brands that you really like together working together. Maybe there are 2 brands on the same t-shirt or 2 brands on the same bag. And you might think as the licensee, oh my gosh, how am I going to afford to pay, the band AC/DC and pay, Superman to combine them and put them on your product? And the good news is there's something called, I'm blanking, the nations.
Oh, favorite nations?
Favorite nations clause. And in the favorite nations clause, one licensee basically can't get more than the other. So the good news is, let's just say you go out to get those licenses, you're gonna split that, and each license that you're taking in the collaboration is they're each going to pay. You're going to pay them each half, and they'll agree on that. And that's something that's pretty standard in the collaborations. And you need to know that because you might be thinking about, wow, how cool would it be to put 2 brands on this. Whatever it is that you're making, your placemat or your bag or your t-shirt. And so this most favored nations clause exists. It's a contractual clause, and that will allow you to split the rates so that you're only paying once and you're splitting it.
So now that we know the products, the channels of distribution, we know where everybody's excited to go forward. We even know the percentage of royalties, the key business terms when it comes down to dollars and cents. And I have a client that says to me all the time, I deposit dollars, I don't deposit percentages. So when it comes down to the dollars, an advance payment, how much money the licensee is going to pay to the licensor at the time we sign the license agreement, and then guaranteed minimum royalties. What is the licensee going to guarantee the licensor in annual payments in order to get this license? I was in a negotiation earlier today where they were actually committing to a 7-figure guarantee. It's a very strong property, and I'm actually representing the licensee, and they're committing to over $1 million in guaranteed royalty payments over the life of the deal, correct? Over 3 years plus a little bit of a ramp-up time. But what are those guaranteed minimums? Now, if you have the hottest new property, if you had Fortnite, you can command those kinds of dollars. And licensees, if you're going to take on that license, make sure that if you're committing to those dollars that you have the ability to distribute enough product to cover it. Licensors, if you have a newer property, you may be negotiating on much lower numbers. Maybe you're only getting, I've done deals with $2,500 advances, sometimes even less than that, or no advance, but you require the licensee to put money into marketing, to put money into product development in order to help you get the product out there. I did one other really interesting thing. I had a client that has a brand, and they own 3 of their own retail stores, and they have a thriving e-commerce business. They took their guaranteed minimum royalty in product. So it helped the licensee because they had minimum production runs anyway. So each time they had to produce 3,000 units of a style, they gave 1,500 units to the licensor. That was real cash value because they put them in their stores, they sold them online, and they took the other 1,500 and sold them to other channels that were permitted. Advance payment on execution, some monetary payment from the licensee to the licensor on the signing of the contract. Licensors, it's important that you see the licensee have skin in the game at the time of signing. And licensees, it's important that you're showing your commitment to the brand and showing your commitment to the brand owners by putting money down at the time of signing. The important thing to take away here with the advance, from a licensee perspective, this is a cash flow item, not an expense item, because that advance is an advance payment against your future royalties. So if you paid, let's just use easy numbers, if you paid a $10,000 advance and it was a 10% royalty, you just prepaid your first $100,000 in sales. You wouldn't have to pay another dollar in royalty until your sales broke $100,000. Why? $100,000 in sales at a 10% royalty, you would owe $10,000 in royalties. So you wouldn't pay, if you advance that 10, you wouldn't pay another dollar in royalties until you broke that 100,000. Everybody understand that concept? So the important thing about an advance, although it seems like a high number, it's really just a prepayment. You're going to let the licensor hold that money until you break that next threshold. Advance payments on execution and guaranteed minimum royalty payments. And very often those guarantees can be a term guarantee. I just talked about that one license. That was a 3-year deal. Or very often they're broken up. I'm going to guarantee you $25,000 in the first year. I'm going to guarantee you $100,000 minimum royalty in the first year, or maybe you're only going to guarantee $2,500 or $5,000 in the first year. Increase that in the second year. You're going to get test orders. You're going to get more customers. Build the licensing program, and by the third year, when this really starts kicking in, that's when we're going to give the bigger numbers. So generally, guaranteed minimum payments increasing from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, and then in the renewal term, and especially if the licensee, you already learned, I told you earlier, you want that right of renewal, you may have to have even higher guarantees in the 4th, 5th, and 6th year, but don't forget, that's at your option. So you have the right to renew, but you're not committing to those dollars today until you've already seen good proof of concept, good sales, good sell-through in the first term.
And this is all negotiable. So you're going to negotiate it in your term sheet, and eventually it'll get to your contract. But as things are going on, if you have a good relationship between the licensee and the licensor, you're going to be able to discuss these things. Look at the climate, right, of the marketplace. If your the marketplace has changed so much. If you're looking at the toy industry specifically, things changed so much last year by losing, Toys R Us, a huge retailer. So sometimes things can be renegotiated. I've seen things where licenses can end sooner than the end of the contract date, and the end guarantee amount can be renegotiated to something that's fair, especially if both parties want out, because not everything works. So you might have a deal that you get into that you want to get out of. So just know that everything is negotiable. You are held, though, to your contract. So just know that it's still a process to get out of something. But you do have requirements for marketing. Sometimes it's a percentage, so as the licensee, you might be held to a percentage of your licensee is a marketing requirement that you have to spend, whether it's commercials, whether it's putting in your catalog, whether it's going to a trade show, whether it's showroom fees. So you do need to work together to understand what is that marketing that you're getting for your brand. And as the licensee, you know what it spends. You wouldn't believe what it costs to do a booth here at this show. It's very important to understand that these booths could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I'm not kidding. And that's being spent on your brand just to have your image up on their wall. So
licensors, you want to ask your licensees to do marketing, attend trade shows, etc. And licensees, you want to ask the licensors, well, what are you doing to market? What are you doing to build this brand so that you make my category stronger? So the marketing commitments can run both ways. I want to hit one more really important point, then we're going to jump ahead to questions, because I see a bunch of people with questions. We'll go to a lightning round, and I'll figure out how to use these headphones. One more really important point. I want to distinguish guaranteed minimum sales, guaranteed minimum royalties, that monetary payment that licensees pay to licensor, from guaranteed minimum sales. Guaranteed minimum sales are sales thresholds that if they are not met, the licensor can terminate. And by the way, a trick I've used, even allowing a licensee to terminate. But a guaranteed minimum sales threshold is a performance requirement. If that said you have to sell $5 million worth of merchandise and you fail to meet that, you don't owe the royalty. You don't owe money, but the licensor could terminate you or the licensee could walk away. So the guaranteed minimum sales are performance thresholds. Guaranteed minimum royalties are dollars that the licensee will owe to the licensor regardless of performance. Everyone understand that distinction? Because that guaranteed minimum sales threshold could be much higher than the guaranteed minimum royalties. But what it does is it allows the licensor to say, hey, I think I'm going to be able to find somebody better. I don't just want guaranteed minimums. I want somebody out there that's blowing this up and building a big program. And by the same token, a licensee could say, you know what? If I'm not able to create a few $1 million or 10 million, whatever the number is, from this property, I don't want to be held to this anymore. I want out. Right. So that guaranteed minimum sales threshold could be used by licensor or the licensee.
And definitely talk to your attorney. And I think the last question that you're going to want to ask them before you sign is, how do I get out of this deal if it's not working? You really need to understand your exit strategy.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You mentioned that in between retail and e-commerce, that velocity was one major difference. Can you identify some other differences when you're licensing digitally, leveraging e-commerce versus retail in the negotiation process?
Yes, because it's a channel of distribution in and of itself. It was formerly an afterthought, and now e-commerce can actually exceed the brick and mortar. It also adds speed to market, it adds to customization and personalization, and it should be treated as its own category. I rattled off a bunch of channels of distribution earlier, and I said mass and department store and off-price and club and specialty. E-commerce can be its own channel of distribution and often needs to be treated as one. Great question. Next.
I want to know what's the difference between the minimum guarantee royalty versus the advance?
So the advance is paid at the time you sign. The guaranteed minimum royalty is something that's guaranteed over the life of the agreement. I'll just use easy numbers. If a license agreement had guaranteed minimum royalties of $30,000 in the first year, $50,000 in the second year, and $70,000 in the third year, you might only pay 10 or 20 at the advance at the time you sign. So the advance is paid when you sign the license, or sometimes it's broken up into 2 payments early on. The guaranteed minimum royalty is based on either the whole term or year to year to year. I did just do a license. It had $125,000 guaranteed minimum royalty, all paid as an advance. So it's just a question of the timing of when you do it. Another great question. Let's get another question. I know up front you had one. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, so what's the industry standard in terms of fees for licensing consultants who represent the licensees?
There's a big range. So depending on what it is, the agent or the consultant will look at the property and determine the amount of time and work that's going to go into preparing that license to be shown to licensees. So to get the brand deck ready, to have a style guide ready, to make sure that you have proper marketing, to make sure that you have ongoing support of your brand. It could be a flat fee to get involved for a period of time to get you ready, and then it could be a percentage of the deal so that there's an investment, a reward on the back end. Sometimes there's a fee per month because there's a lot of ongoing work that needs to be done by the agent or the consultant. So they will charge you a fee per month so that you always have the services retained and you know they're working on your license.
Just follow-up question. Is it common to have both fees upfront or flat upfront
Yes.
and points?
It could be, yes. So
I would always encourage
Yeah.
the points because you want, and I'll tell you my perspective as an agent, I want to stay hungry and I want to be able to maximize that. There are some agents that just act as a consultant. You could pay them hourly as a pure consultant. For me, and if I was in your shoes, I want my consultant to have a piece of the deal because I know they're going to work harder if they're getting paid more money based on how much money they make for me. So there are very often some sort of a base monthly or a base up front, but the bulk of my compensation, the only way I'm making really big money is when I'm making you big money. Great questions. Next one.
During the licensing negotiation phase, as a licensee, is it proper to ask the licensor how many other licensees have been granted a license?
sure.
Not only how many, who they are,
yeah.
and reach out to them.
Right.
And you can actually ask them how well they're doing. I mean, how deep can you go?
There's
to make sure?
there's actually references that can be requested. There's a really great book I want to recommend to everybody that was written by experts like us in the licensing industry, and it's called The Basics of Licensing. And that literally will tell you everything you need to know, but it will answer that questions very specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Great question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Last question, and then we're going to break. Go ahead.
Yes. What are the major marketing methods that licensees use to market the products? The major marketing methods.
So obviously you want them to go to the big trade shows. You want to make sure that they put it in front of as many eyeballs, that not only are they going to the trade shows, but they're taking advertising in the industry publications so that lots of eyeballs worldwide are seeing this property. You also want them to do things around the show, like the brand liaison has really big stands where they represent and put the branding on their licenses. So you want to work with somebody who's making sure they're getting the eyeballs on there. It could also be social media. It could be that they're highlighting your brand wherever. I'm not sure what's going on here.
We're getting flagged on time. We're going to take
Okay.
the last question.
Okay.
Yes, you could. Last question.
All right.
You come see me after the show. Go ahead.
All right, I'll make this quick.
Sure.
So, in your experience, do you think there are special considerations to take when as a licensee, the product itself is digital in like the gaming context.
It's a brand new world. I'll let Alita talk to it.
So specifically, you want to know with the gaming.
So basically, I'm a licensee representing a game, wanting to license in-game content, and so it's our own storefront in basically direct to retail model, except it's our in-game store basically.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, so you're the game.
Yes.
And you have the game, whether it's on an app or a physical game, and you want to put licenses in that game.
Yes.
Okay, so you want to pay for, Mickey Mouse to show up in your game, for example.
Basically, not the best fit, but you get the idea.
Right. Okay, it's probably an adult game. Okay, so yes, you're still taking on a license. It's still what you're doing is you might be doing it not for monetary gain, but you might be doing it because you want the marketing value of it, right? So there's still a value that you're going to be able to place on that, and it's still a negotiation between you and that brand IP owner. So you're still going to expect to pay a royalty in advance. The same terms will apply, but if you're
I have something important. So you're highly in demand because any of those licensors will want to be in your video game if it matches DNA. The key is, how do you charge to use that property? Is there an upcharge, an in-game purchase?
Yes.
So then again, what Alita was saying, that in-game purchase is going to be how you negotiate this, but you're probably in high demand because that licensor wants to be in your video game and get the promotional value. So you're highly coveted.
I just had this situation come up, so we could talk after.
Okay.
But yeah, sometimes it's for the marketing of it. Sometimes there's a dollar amount attached to it.
I want to thank you.
Little column B.
I want to thank you all for coming. Hopefully you found this informative. Take that term sheet, negotiate the heck out of it, whichever side you're on, and go get that licensing deal done. Thank you.
Good luck.